we got Nika Elugardo. She is my new state representative, or I guess I should say state rep-elect. And she took down an extremely powerful legislator who was chair of Ways and Means and who said he was a progressive but didn't act like a progressive very often. And whatever was in his heart, we don't know, but he decided to ally with the power structures in the establishment. It was a tough fight, and we are so happy to have Nika, who is a progressive in word and in deeds. And then next up is going to be Carl Williams. He is a movement lawyer who is teaching at Cornell Law School and is also a fellow at Political Research Associates. And I think he's going to talk about the rights capture of the judiciary, among other matters. And then Michele Brooks is the community outreach coordinator with the Massachusetts Sierra Club. Nika.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for showing up, which is a big part of the battle, as many of you know, and many of you have been showing up for decades. So I want to talk a little bit about where I'm coming from. I grew up in communities where justice for all was not something I believed in. And in fact, I didn't finish the Pledge of Allegiance as my little middle school protest. I would end the pledge at justice, period. Nobody cared but me, but I was trying to make a statement that injustice was the rule of the day for many of us. But as I grew older and began to work in community and economic development and moved beyond protests, which are extremely important, but into structures to figure out how do we actually respond to what we are asking to change and make it change, I realized that we're building justice. We're building justice for all together. It's not something that I'm waiting for somebody to provide for me. It's something that I'm making. And I'm making it with many, many good people, really from every sector of society. And ultimately, I've had opportunities to do that with people across the world. And so now I proudly finish the pledge, Justice for All. More importantly, it's a vision. A vision for justice for all means that all people in our nation will actually have access to the pursuit of happiness that our so-called founders accidentally provided for all of us. When we wrote the state constitution for Massachusetts, which became the framework for the Constitution of the United States of America, we somehow, despite the fact that the people writing it didn't want to include most of us in the room, because remember, you even had to own land, really, to qualify for anything. So poor white men, who are now in their revolt, were struggling back then in some of the ways that we can identify with today. And I say all of this to say, we need to recapture the vision of our very young democracy. And we do not have a failed democracy. We have a young democracy. So how many of you, and some of you have heard me say this before, how many of you have any toddler anywhere in your life? Toddler, like you've experienced toddlers. And for most toddlers, what would happen if you gave them an arsenal? They would be the founding of the United States of America. We've graduated from that. We've developed, we've socially developed, we've culturally developed to an adolescent who has acknowledged that there are other people in the world and begrudgingly pays attention to them, but still mostly towards the ends of trying to get what they want. And that's developmentally appropriate for an adolescent. And through the course of your adolescence, you learn not only to be aware that other people are there and you have to negotiate that, but to care that other people are there, to put yourself in their shoes, and then ultimately to have relationships that are mutual and that are others-oriented. And that's where we need to graduate. Now, for many of you, you know that when an adolescent is traumatized or a younger child is traumatized, they become stuck developmentally. And that's exactly what's going on in our country. We're stuck in an adolescent level of development. But what's exciting is Massachusetts has been at the forefront each time our nation has jumped forward. We had the first of many things, which I won't list because too many of you have heard me make that list before. What we need to do is not just have a vision, but we have to deconstruct what the trauma is that we need to heal from in order to realize a vision of justice for all. And I say that that trauma is really embedded in the fact that we've never renounced the racial hatred of slavery and enslavement. And slavery and enslavement is not just about what it actually is. with regards to race. It represents a broader conception of beholdenness to a master. And the plantations of our history were the corporations of today. And so what we need to do in renouncing slavery is also to renounce the conception that there is a master and the rest of the people are either enslaved or somewhere between, like an overseer, the slave and the master. This is how the State House of Representatives works in Massachusetts, okay? And this is why it's been acceptable to amass power towards a central figure like the Speaker of the House, regardless of the person who's in it. The infrastructure is structurally racist, structural poverty is supported by it, and structural oppression is supported. So you can have wonderful progressives enter into it, and it will produce the same result if you don't change the structure. And so we can come at this change from two different directions, and over the course of the day and over the course of the legislative session, you will hopefully see this unfold. So first you have to think about strategy, right? So in my campaign, we want to look at what are the core elements of society, what are the core goods that we need to rip away from corporate strongholds and control under public goods. So we're talking about housing, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about education. So many, many years ago, our state and our nation said that education was a right for all. Not so many years ago, we did the same thing for healthcare. And the whole time since we made those decisions, we've been trying to give more power to corporations to take back over and insert a slavery model into those institutions. And in fact, that sort of enslavement model is infecting all of the major institutions of the United States. It's where sexism comes from. It's where homophobia and transphobia comes from. It's where xenophobia and religious hatred come from. It's all the same root of the same beast. It's like legs of the same beast. They travel together, the same beast of hate. And so as we face these things, by developing policy initiatives, we also have to think about shifting the culture. Because the strategy, right, which is, okay, what is going to be our healthcare policy for healthcare for all so that we can legitimately do this work? How are we going to make sure that education is equal? What are we going to do in housing to make sure that housing is also a right that we need to declare in Massachusetts? So I'll talk a little bit about housing as an example, but I also want to just caution us that strategy is not enough. As a friend told me, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And shifting culture is not a speedboat. Speedboat journey. Shifting culture is a sailing journey. So you have to tack, and you have to tack, and you have to tack until you get to the place where you're going. And so it doesn't just look like sharing the same message that we share all the time, but adapting our message so that different people can understand it. So for example, in the case of housing, now we do not have a message of housing for all in Massachusetts. So that's a vision. We want to see housing for all. But how can we message that? What does it look like? It looks like a world where we're not just talking about justice, but we're also talking about integrity, and we're also talking about meritocracy. Now, meritocracy is a word that I kind of hate because it's generally used to oppress. But if we're going to speak across the realm of people that we need to have housing for all, we need to recognize that there are forms of investment in our community that are more important than what happens when somebody puts down $1 to purchase in a capitalist society. And so we need to develop models and are in fact developing policies even now. For example, myself with Brookline Housing Authority, where people who have invested in publicly held lands because they've lived there for 30, 40, or 50 years can get a return on that investment. And we're no longer saying to them, how can we keep you in our property? We're saying, this is the property you've invested in. It's the most expensive and valuable land in the country, monetarily wise, and we're going to make sure that our policies going forward share that value with you. These are the kinds of messages that speak to people across the state, and this is what we have to do, and this is how we have to think if we're going to shift from a slavery mindset to a justice for all.
Is that on? It's on. Yeah. How y'all doing? That was kick-ass. Thank you. So I feel blessed by that and blessed by being here and seeing all of you folks and being on the panel with these great folks. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna do like the hip hop thing and get real close. Is that good? All right. My friend Ernesto Arroyo, rapper and community activist, taught me how to hold a mic. So I want to first talk about exactly what Nika was saying, and I feel blessed because it's a bit of a segue from that. And I want to talk about the Constitution of the United States for a little bit of a second, because our structures are incredibly important. Or their structures are incredibly important, and where this country at this moment comes from. I'm a bit of a nerd, and I actually went through the Constitution as it was originally drafted without the amendment. So the way the Constitution of the United States was originally drafted, right? If you look at that document and you count words, which is like a thing that I do, and you say how many of these words actually are explicitly about race, or they don't say things explicitly about race, but they were made to be explicitly about owning human beings, selling human beings, protecting the law that allows that to happen, and protecting human beings as property, right? And denying rights, so the 3/5 compromise. And actually, I'll ask it as a question. How many people know in that same part of the Constitution, it's Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3, what it says about, it implies that black people have three-fifths, that count as 3/5 of a person for representation. What does it say about Native American folks? It's 0. And what is it now for that same clause for Native folks? 0. It's still the same thing. There's some national sovereignty things about that, but I won't go into it. But that exists, right? And there are also parts of the Constitution that were unamendable. There were parts of the Constitution that you could not change for a number of years, right? And you would think, well, that's probably like that we can't have a king or that we have to elect a president, right? It's the most important parts. Guess which parts were unamendable when the Constitution was written? Parts that protected, I won't say slavery, the parts that protected owning human beings and selling human beings. Because let's be very clear about what that was. Those parts were unamendable for a number of years. Because the people writing the Constitution said, well, I want to be able to own people as long as I'm alive. So let's put a 40 or 50 or 60-year clause in there. So I'll be okay, right? That is a stunning piece of information that nobody taught me in my constitutional law class, right? That is the thing that should always be, if you're talking about the Constitution of the United States, we should always talk about that, right? Because at its essence, the founding document of this country is white supremacist, right? So today, we should not be, we say, well, we made some mistakes and maybe there's a police rule that we could change and we could change this system of white supremacy. It's written into the most thing that we could call the DNA of this country. It is written, there are places in Massachusetts where it's actually written in stone, right? It's written in stone. That takes a lot to change. So I actually wrote down your paraphrased quote about culture and strategy. But I think that's a thing that we have to remember, right? And to just quote, I'll quote and then I'll paraphrase, but Audre Lorde said the master's tools can never be used to destroy the master's house. And also the master's structure of government can never be used to take down that structure of government. Because as previous speakers had just said, this structure was created, right? The electoral system and to some extent the Senate were created to give power to those same elements, right? And if we think that we're going to vote that system out of power using that system, that's a tough cookie, right? So other things have to happen, and that's things that we're going to be talking about all day and have been talking about. That's community organizing, that's doing litigation, legislation to build community power across this country. But I want to talk about some organizing that some other folks did, because that's what I'm here to talk about, but knowing that that's our base. So in 1981, a bunch of people were upset about what was going on in the country, right? And they said, we're going to get together. And they decided to get together at a university. Right? And they said, we're going to have a meeting and we're going to bring a bunch of people who are pissed off together, right? And this is the start of the Reagan Revolution. And they said, let's have a conference. This became the Federalist Society in the United States. They met at Yale. They said, we are going to take over entirely the federal judiciary. And to some extent, the judiciary of the United States. And right now, we're seeing the culmination, the fruition of that organizing, right? right? They spent whatever that is, close to 35, close to 40 years doing that. And they said, we're going to do this, and what we're going to do is organize across this country. We're going to go to every law school, and then they actually expanded, and they said, we're going to go to every business school. So there's a thing called the Adam Smith Society in business schools. They're organizing in medical schools. I can't remember, there's the name of some horrible reactionary doctor that is the Federal Society in medical schools. And have meetings and tell people, you know what, if you want to be a federal judge, join the Federalist Society when you're in law school, and we'll help you become a federal judge. And the Federalist Society has a list that they've given to the President of the United States, and they say, these are the people who we think are okay, right? And every person that Republicans have nominated for the Supreme Court since the existence of this Federal Society list has either been on the list or approved by the Federalist Society. So you have a private organization that says, is this person good for the court? And they say, not on our list. How about this person? Not on the list, but let's check them out. Okay, we like them. So I think when we see Kavanaugh come to the court, we say, oh, this is a piece of Trump. This is, and it is, right? It certainly is. But also, this is a plan this is an organizing plan that has been in effect for decades and decades, right? And one of the things I say, a bit to shame us and to get us mobilized to action, I know everyone, because I've seen a bunch of people in the room doing things, across the state and across the country, but to mobilize us, we got out-organized. We got out-organized on this. And granted, they have access to a lot of rich white men, institutional power, and money. But one of the things that I was taught in organizing is organized people will always beat organized money, right? Because I guarantee you can't buy the people who are on the stage, and you can't buy you all, right? Like the Koch brothers come and say, I'll give you $100,000. That doesn't work for me, right? Because we have heart, and we have truth, we have conviction, and we have freedom on our side, right? So one of the things I think that we need to look at is that long-range plan that the Federalist Society put into effect and do things like that. Because the NRA did this too. In the 80s, the NRA said, we're going to make it an individual right in this country to own a firearm. And they spent the same about 30 years. And the Supreme Court at the time said, that is not what the Constitution says. And they said, we don't care. We're just going to buy it. We're going to litigate it. We're going to organize. We're going to fight like hell and make it that way. And we, on the other side of freedom, justice, anti-colonialism, need to fight the same, in some ways the same way, because I think a lot of times we are in desperate, immediate fights, and we don't see the very long-range vision. These people who have access to enormous amount of power look and say, in 40 years, we're going to control the court. That's my time, but I'll just finish by saying, some of those things that the Federalists have done, the NRA has done, and have made takeovers of the federal system in this country, we need to push back on that. We need to be aware of that this is not a one-time thing under Donald Trump, and we need to be able to fight back. Thank you.
Did you already try it? Or?
Here we go.
Got it? All right.
These are the slides.
There you go. Full screen. Yeah.
How do I do the project option? Slideshow. There we go, from beginning. There we go. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? Well caffeinated? Feeling good? Thank you for being here. My name is Michele Brooks, and I work for the Massachusetts chapter of the Sierra Club, and I'm here today to talk about the climate crisis and why it's urgent that we act now and what you can do. Just a little background about the Sierra Club for those who might not be familiar. We are the nation's oldest and largest environmental grassroots organization, founded by John Muir back in 1892. Currently, we have 63 chapters across the country and more than 3.5 million members and supporters. And our core mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. So who we are and what we do, this kind of captures a lot of it. We organize, we advocate, we lobby, we meet with our legislators, we testify, we rally, we get out there in the streets, in the trenches, and we also get outdoors. And as Nika mentioned in her piece, showing up for others is a huge part of it. And at Sierra Club, we believe that it is our obligation and our moral imperative to show up for others and stand in solidarity with those who are fighting for justice across all movements. So we have a climate crisis. As many of you may have heard, the UN's most recent IPCC report was pretty scary. Basically says that we have 12 years to drastically cut our carbon emissions in order to save the planet. Some specifics: we need to reduce our emissions by 45% by 2030 to avoid mass extinctions, famines, displacement, and diseases. That's my lifetime. That's our lifetimes. And it's scary, but we absolutely have the power and the technologies to solve this crisis. In recent years, we've been seeing the impacts. We've been seeing increasing storms in frequency and in severity. Just in the last year, Harvey, Irma, Maria, some of the worst storms on record, Florence, the California mudslides, and most recently, the California wildfires that are still currently blazing, hundreds of people missing. It is devastating. Here locally in Massachusetts and in Boston, experts are saying we can expect to experience anywhere between 3 and 7 feet of sea level rise by 2100. Last year alone, we saw 3 record-breaking storms with unprecedented flooding, and the image below is from a video of a dumpster floating down an alley in Boston. We're not seeing the kind of action that we want to at the federal level. Obviously, Trump has said that climate change is a hoax. He doesn't believe it exists. He pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accord. So cities and states must lead. Go back to that. That's a good slide. And we have the solutions. We absolutely have the solutions and the technical ability to get there. Beginning with efficiency, we're currently wasting approximately 70% of the energy in our buildings. Electrification of our heating and our transportation systems. Decarbonizing the grid and adding more renewable, clean technologies, and modernizing the grid to allow the adaptability for more renewables to come online. But we have quite a few obstacles, and the main one that I want to point out is political will. Simply put, that's the main challenge that we're up against right now, and the only way to address this is to organize, to build a movement, to work within our communities, and to create the public pressure that's needed on our elected officials to take this seriously and to act now. And the other way, of course, is the voting booth. If you're not going to take action and you're not, we're going to hold you accountable and we're going to vote you out. Similarly, as we did with Representative Sanchez. And now we have a progressive champion in Nika. So vested interest money, this is another big one. The fossil fuel industries are pouring thousands of dollars into their lobbying at the State House. Front groups, such as the Mass Coalition for Sustainable Energy, which is really a front group for the gas industry. State leadership from industry as well. As some of you may or may not know, the chairperson of our Department of Public Utilities, Angie O'Connor, was previously the president of the New England Power Generators Association and the vice president of AIM, which is a lobby group that has been pushing gas. So, and the last is, this isn't the most glamorous stuff to be talking about. We recognize that a lot of wonky technical terms, net metering, municipal aggregation, grid modernization, building electrification. Yeah, but we can make it interesting. We bring the energy. We bring the energy. So what can we do? Don't panic, organize. Start organizing and join the movement. Find a community and build a local team. Connect with national groups like Sierra Club who can support you in training and providing resources. This past year alone, we had so many members calling our organization, actually since Trump got elected in 2016, saying, in a panic, what can I do now? So we started these trainings across the state to teach our members and supporters how to effectively advocate to their elected officials and to start setting up meetings to talk about these issues. So this is an example of a meeting that we held with Rep. Carolyn Dykema in Westboro. We've done dozens of those within the last year. Our weapons are our phones and our sneakers and our abilities to build a movement together. Thank you.
Thank you, Michele. We have time for some questions and discussion. Please line up at the center mic, and please limit your comments to 1 minute. Mary Ellen, you're up.
I'm up. Hi. Hi. So I'd like to just make a comment and get some people's reactions. I've been reading the remarkable radical historian Roxanne Dunbar-Ortiz. She's got a number of books out, and recently she's been arguing how the Constitution, the Second Amendment to the Constitution, that people consider, well, they're about militias and about hunting. She actually argues, and her research shows wonderfully, that amendment was put in fundamentally to eradicate the native population and for rounding up slaves or controlling slaves. And I was wondering if anyone could speak to that, to elaborate a little bit.
So that is on, yeah. So I think you have to look at the mindset at the time, right? So what were Christian, white, landowning, literate, cis men, colonizers, what did they want at the time, right? So put yourself in that mindset. And there are many things, I think. They wanted more land. They wanted to subjugate women. They very explicitly wanted to subjugate black women and clear the lands of the original inhabitants, right? So that's part of the political mindset that existed at the powers that be at the time. So is that, if I was going to break that down into a pie chart and say how much of each one, I think it's hard to say. I think even some of those individuals wouldn't know, how much it is to each one of those. But certainly that was the in-power mindset at the time. And I'll just say, to bring it forward, it isn't exactly not the mindset today, right? Because when people talk about black folks or brown folks with guns, I think there's a very, very different attitude towards the Second Amendment than white men with guns.
Is this on? Yeah. Okay. Thank you all so much. Nika, I wanted to ask you how you're going to restructure the State House and what can we do to help?
Well, the you should be plural, hopefully, and not Nika. And in that case, from that perspective, I'll answer the question. So people like myself, and there are a great many of us who come in this freshman class and in several classes prior, but in smaller numbers, we're attracted to the State House because it's a place of possibility. And so we have to flip the narrative. So everyone gets excited when you say, stand up to the status quo. But it's a little harder when you say, don't think like the status quo and don't act like the status quo. Because what the status quo would do, if they were us, is figure out a way to bully their way into power and to be more progressive. And so one of the messages that I've been sharing with my fellow rep-elects and also with those who are interested in talking to me about this, who are already in the State House and have been working very hard there for justice issues for a long time, is we need to reframe our thinking and to use a different model of leadership. And when people tell us that that model of leadership doesn't work, we can say, yes, it does. Now, I can say yes, it does, because I actually didn't start leading when I ran for office. And so I've been doing leadership and learning leadership for many, many years from people who don't use transactional dynamics to get at justice. They use justice to get at justice. And so what that looks like, so somebody snapped because they know what I mean, but everyone's like, so what does that mean? So what that means is transactional dynamics have to serve a cause. And that cause has to be connected to a vision. And with that vision, you can test back to see is what we're doing making sense. So when we ask to shift who's in leadership, we have to think about what we mean about leadership. So one of the things people have asked me, what committee are you going to get on? What are you going to be in charge of? These are not the relevant questions. The relevant questions is, who are we mobilizing inside the State House to tap into their desire to see justice done and to help them to believe that possibilities will be real if we agree together, organize together, and work together. That concept that brings us together is no different for people that don't think like us on every issue. I've worked in different parts of the world, and it's a universal principle that people have in our hearts the ability and the desire to love each other and to work together for change that benefits all. And that's something that we can do inside of the State House. So what you can do as advocates is to have patience and grace when we are working with people who are obstacles. And so we need a diversity. We need the rock throwers. I saw my professional rock thrower friend. Oh, there she is, Monica, professional rock thrower. Give her a hand. And she has promised me to keep throwing the rocks. So she's not going to run for office, at least for the next 3 months. And some of us are negotiators, and some of us are going to be collaborators, and some of us are going to go into red districts and make friends, and some of us are going to continue honing the message for people that already think like us so that we have the data and understand what we're doing. But what I need all of us here to do is to approach all of those people with open arms, because I can tell you right now, I'm already working with conservatives, I'm already working with moderates, and I'm working with fake progressives. None of the people that you, I'm not talking about you, anyone who is hearing that and wondering if you're talking about me. No, of course not. And true progressives. And true progressives have all different kinds of values of what that means to them. And across that whole framework, I need us to be open-minded and loving and embracing and to build understanding. And you can utilize me as a translator. I'm comfortable talking to all those different kinds of people. While we have our dedicated rock throwers, they need to be the minority as we shift away from protest mode to actually making structural change.
Jada.
Hi, everybody. Shada with Corporate Accountability. Just along the lines of what you were just saying, Nika, about building alliances across many different issues, and then thinking also, Carl, about the comment that you made about how racism is in the DNA of this country, and then thinking about just the different issues that are represented on this panel, and particularly building synergies between the environmental justice movement and the anti-racism movement in this country. Can you all give us some examples of building strong coalitions across issues and race and religion and all of those different differences? And then also, I wanted to also just zoom us out to think also about how we're building alliances at the global level, because a lot of the challenges that we're facing are global in nature. I mean, climate change, the issue of corporate capture of governments. So if you could speak to that. And one quick shout out on that is that there's a global coalition that is calling for people's demands on climate justice. And so if you all are interested in signing that, it's going around today. But we really need people globally and people's movements to be setting the direction, not corporations.
I'm just going to be real quick and pass it on, because one message that's resonating across groups is accountability, transparency, and fair democratic governance. And so that's something that in our state in particular, even Republicans feel very shut out from. And I don't mean like sort of a I'm not talking about the rise of the xenophobic whatever. I mean, like, sort of just basic moderate conservatives, Baker conservatives, feel shut out from democratic governance and justice just the way that progressives do. So these are the kinds of alliances we can build. And then progressives have to remember, once we level the playing field, we will still have to make our arguments in debate. Leveling the playing field does not make the world more progressive. We'll still have a lot of work to do after that.
And just super quickly, I think I'll sort of just ask this as a question. When people think of what Black Lives Matter works on, so in your mind, think about what that is. And I'm doing this as a little bit of a trick, but you think of probably a very small set of things. If people haven't read, you have to read, and if you read it again. The vision for Black Lives Matter was founded by 2 queer women, one daughter of Nigerian immigrants, 3 women, right, who are also Black, right? So I like to draw Venn diagrams. That's a lot of overlap, right? That's a lot of issues packed into even the identity of those people. But the vision for Black Lives talks about, aside from the idea of abolishing the current criminal legal system and the sort of police structure that exists, it talks about liberation for the people of Palestine, right? It's an essential part of Black liberation according to the movement, to the organization. So I think organizations and movements that are coming forward that are newer, and when undocumented folks are organizing here in Massachusetts, organizations like SIM and organizations like Movimiento Cosecha, they're not just talking about, like, by the way, I would like to have a passport. They're saying, by the way, a lot of us are Black. By the way, a lot of us are South Asian. By the way, a lot of us are Pacific Islanders. By the way, the gentrification that affects us in Boston is also part of our lives, right? The way we are policed by the Boston Police Department, the way we are murdered by the Boston Police Department are part of our lives, right? So when those organizations, when those movements work together, I think of directly oppressed people, you always see that synergy, right? You always see that synergy. So one of the things that I try to do is follow folks who are deeply and directly affected more, and then we always see that crossover of issues because people are trying to be about their lives and be free.
And I would just add, from my perspective, working for an environmental organization, I think it really begins with, like I said, showing up for others and standing in solidarity. That's hugely important to us. And so one specific example of this, for example, is the People's Climate Movement. And this past year in September, we organized a day of action in East Boston across a big, vast, different types of groups, including immigrant rights groups, racial justice groups, faith-based groups, and bringing all of our struggles to the table and realizing that they are all interconnected. And for example, the issue of climate change, that impacts all of us. And oftentimes, the worst impacts are on the people who are contributing the least to the problem.
So I need to do a brief announcement before we proceed. Everyone here paid a fee to register. Our expenses to run this conference, unfortunately, have exceeded our income, and we have a deficit of about $3,000. So those of you who are in position, I would appreciate your digging into your pocket and putting something in the basket that Michele is about to pass around. If you want to make a check out, you could make it out to Mass Peace Action Education Fund and write next 2 years on the memo line. Life will go on. Our sponsoring groups.
Can I just say, there's about 100 and something people in this room, so if everybody did, like $30, we'd be there.
We would be there. Everyone doesn't have an equal ability, but. Okay, so thank you. So next up is Bruce.
Of course, I'd like to thank you all, and I don't mean this to sound in any way critical, but the statement was made that the foundation was racism, and I suggest that the foundation is genocide. And speaking on behalf of our American, indigenous, third world brothers and sisters, I call upon us to pay more attention to the ongoing struggles of the Native people who have not perished. There were 100 million indigenous people in the Americas at the time Christopher the Conqueror arrived. There are now 8 million, and they are fighting to survive, and they are on our side, but they don't really, you'll forgive me for saying this, give a shit about us. Do you think there's a difference between a Republican and a Democratic president to an American Indian? So I'm begging you, on behalf of Mother Earth, on behalf of unity, on behalf of spirit and soulfulness, please recognize the connections between all of us and support our indigenous brothers and sisters, Minnie Wachoni. Wachoni.
No, hang on, there's a mic. So people, the identities of even us, I think, might not be readily apparent to people because of sort of institutionalized structures. My ancestors were enslaved people from Africa. My ancestors were Italian-American, were Italian and Italian-American. My ancestors were Anglo-American, and my ancestors were Narragansett, right? My father is a Narragansett. So speaking on behalf of, don't talk to the panel and say speaking on behalf of, because my ancestors have been changed into a name of a beach, Narragansett Beach, and a beer, Narragansett beer, which disgusts me. But my ancestors have been in New England. I actually said this in a meeting a little while ago. I said, we've been here for over 5,000 years. And someone laughed because they were like, well, how could someone be in New England for 5,000 years? Because they had a very white mindset. And someone laughed at me because of that. And then I just gave a very fierce look, and they looked at me like I just didn't know history. And I looked at them like they didn't know history. A reality, right? Like literally say, like people do not exist. People exist. How many, actually I'll do it, because how many Native brothers and sisters, people of Native ancestry from these Americas, how many people are in the room right now? Right, there are people in this room, right? We have political ideas, we exist, right? We're not just in John Wayne movies getting murdered. But sometimes we don't look like what people think we should look like, because people remember the crying, I'm going to put in quotes, the crying Indian that was on TV in the 70s. So people in this room will remember that, who was really an Italian-American person. Iron Eyes Cody. So I appreciate the focus. A little bit, it's uncomfortable to because of my identity to the way that was delivered. So, end of rant.
Just to add, just from the state ledge slide, I personally am working with a couple of the organizations, NICOB, which is in my district, which I was excited about and reached out to them right away, and the Massachusetts statewide group for American Indians as well, not just because it's delightful for me, but there's also policy on the table, and so some of that is being addressed at least through that one arm of things.
Okay. Hi. This question is more about environment. Besides from the global scale, our citywide, our landfill is full. It's been expanded a few times. It's at its limit. Our recycling is being trucked to Connecticut and dumped in a dump in there. So this is something that I would really love to address in Taunton, as we address, the crisis, because this is also a crisis. And I'm wondering if you all can help me do that.
Yes. Did you say it's in Taunton?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to help you with that. It's all relative. I mean, reducing waste is another huge part of it, because these materials are also contributing to our emissions, and yes, I had heard about that. So let's connect.
Oh, hello, hi. Thank you to all the panelists. And Nika, I got to hear you speak yesterday at the New England Women's Policy Conference. You were great. And Carlton, I heard you about a year ago at the conference in Cambridge. But my question is for Nika and Carlton. It is about, I wanted to ask you if you could comment on the legislative and legal efforts to criminalize efforts toward the BDS, boycotts, divestment, and sanction movement, and its implications for nonviolent organizing and free speech. So, thank you.
So I'll give a little bit of an explainer, just if people don't know, hopefully folks do. BDS is boycott, divestment, and sanctions of companies and organizations that are supporting the other white settler state of Israel. that has upset a lot of Zionists in power structures and across the country. There's been a movement to across the world, actually, because it happens in Israel also, to criminalize that protest, right? Which I'll just say, as you know, a former staff person of the American Civil Liberties Union, any attempt to boycott the content of speech or political action in that way is, even under the Constitution of the United States, is unconstitutional. Sure. So any attempt to do that is almost certainly unconstitutional. So there have been 3 attempts in Massachusetts, all of those because of many people in this room and many organizations, and acting in solidarity with Palestinian people and people who care about human and civil rights have been defeated. They're still hard at work to doing that. But one of the things, I think a lot of people have been very upset about this. They're like, they're coming after BDS. This is what winning looks like. They're coming after it because it is, go ahead, clap for yourselves. They're coming after it because it's a tactic that is actually working. In Israel, organizations in the United States that are working to support that kind of rightist Zionism they're like, this is the #1 threat. We need to stop this. And I'll say this, just sort of as an inspirational thing. Instead of actually, spending all of their time lobbying for more money and weapons, they have to spend a lot of time stopping the victories that people in this room, people acting in solidarity with Palestinian people, are doing. So people are winning. Keep it up. If you don't know find out more about the BDS movement and be part of it, and be part of the movement to stop these laws or these bills that are trying to stop that very powerful form of protest.
And I'll just quickly say that similarly, not that I want to say it's not something to worry about, but I think the challenge has been not having legislators who are willing to speak boldly about it, because when the speech is there on both sides, we win that particular argument, not just legally, but also rhetorically, not everywhere, but overall. And so you have that in myself and in many others who are willing to take on the difficult work, even in my own district, of explaining why we think BDS is so important.
I can't resist harping on the fact that we also have an Israel Anti-Boycott Act pending in the federal Congress, and we do have 2 members of Congress from Massachusetts who are co-sponsoring that attempt to suppress free speech. Joe Kennedy, Richard Neal. Let them know. We have time for one more question.
Okay, I wanted to ask this. I've sometimes heard about this in books about wolf conservation, but I'm a little concerned with certain indigenous communities, because I've heard that indigenous reindeer herding cultures from Scandinavia and Russia want every wolf in Scandinavia and or Russia dead. Is that true? I hope it's not. And I have sometimes known some people who've defended a culture's right to do that based on cultural diversity, but I really don't think that cultural diversity and cultural relativity should be used as an excuse to wipe an entire species out of a region. Are there any like Sami or Venki or Chukchi here? You don't know.
Looks like we'll have to get back to you on that. Thanks.
Sorry. I know that there were Sami who joined the Lakota at Standing Rock, but I hope that that not all of them are in favor of wiping out the Scandinavian wolf. You know about that?
Mind if I ask a question?
Okay, Jared, last one.
I love this panel. Nika and Carl are amazing people. You'll hear me. What gives you the most hope?
Right now, I would say it's young people. People like the March for Our Lives movement, the Sunrise movement. Folks are here today. For example, their action where they stormed Nancy Pelosi's office, sat in there and demanded that she not accept fossil fuel money and act more aggressively to address this issue. So young people are really bringing me hope right now. That's one thing.
Monica, we're out of time. Sorry. Go ahead.
I'll say same, but also in the last 2 years, some of the greatest things that have ever happened in this country have happened, right? So I'll say the day that the president of this country signed the initial racist Muslim ban was also the same day he signed some documentation in relation to the Dakota Access Pipeline project. So 5,000 Native Americans and supporters marched in New York City, right? At the same time, 15,000 undocumented people, immigrants, and their allies marched in New York City, and they joined up in Washington Square Park just because a lot of protests in New York joined up in Washington Square Park. There were over 20,000 people in Washington Square Park protesting for Native rights and for immigrants' rights in this country. If someone gave me all of us $1 million or $20 million 20 years before that and said, we want you to organize a protest like that between Native American folks and Arab and Muslim folks and their allies and supporters in Washington Square Park, we'd be like, it's going to be pretty hard to do. I don't know if I can do that. That's pretty rough. And maybe, right? But this happened. And separately, also in that same 2-year period of time, the largest amount of human beings in the history of the world came together to do one thing, more than for anything else that has happened in the history of humanity. And there are some issues with some of the politics of some parts of the Women's March, but more people around the world came together to do one single thing, and that is stand up for women's rights and other rights than ever has happened in human history. That singularly is an amazing thing. That is just a good thing. And I think a lot of times we're like, look at all these bad things happening. It's like, that was amazing. That thing was positive, it was amazing. If we organized our whole lives and that one thing was our success, that would be an amazing victory. And people are building on that. And I think we should look to those things as, this is the last gasp of systems of white supremacy, or it's our death knell. It's one of those two. But it is, I'll tell you who it's up to. It isn't up to them. It is up to us. And all we need to do is double down, know that we can win, and fight like hell.
Okay, I want to give the last comment to Monica, and then we're going to go to breakout. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So I don't have a question. I have a comment. I would implore everybody to kind of tap into your discomfort. And what I mean by that is I've listened to us discuss plenty of issues. I could yell, but okay. I've listened to us discuss plenty of issues in this room, but one thing I want to highlight for you is that there are Black and brown people who feel left out of this conversation. I heard you say different organizations that gave you hope when the question was asked, and one of those was March for Our Lives. I see Moms Demand Action in this space. But a couple of things I want to say. When we talk about the conversation around gun violence, legislation is not a Black and brown issue because all of our guns are illegal. Our issue is where the guns are coming from, and there are a group of Black and brown kids who've been screaming to the top of their lungs for a really long time and being ignored. And so I would implore you to step out of your comfort zone and support them as well, because what happens is that oftentimes we're showing up for everybody else's movement and no one's showing up for our movement. And so on Monday, we'll be doing a die-in at City Hall for Black and brown lives, and BPS kids will be walking out because of the homicide rate in the city of Boston that often gets ignored and looped into legislation. The truth is all our guns are illegal. So it wouldn't affect communities of color. We have some of the strictest gun laws in the country in Massachusetts, and Black and brown kids are dying. Teen homicides are up. Homicides in the city of Boston are up 20%. So I would implore you guys to look into that and support that as well, because we're always being called to ask to support others, but when the support is waiting to be returned, it's few and far between. Thank you. So it's Monday. We're asking BPS kids to walk out at 12:30. We're going to meet at City Hall around 2 o'clock, and we're going to die in for 43 minutes for the 43 homicides that have happened in the city of Boston, but 175 people have been shot year to date. So Monday, 12:30, the kids will walk out. If they are unable to leave school, we're asking everybody to die in at 2:30 where they are. In solidarity with us on Monday. And the reason why we're going to City Hall is because we have one of the strongest mayors in this country. He has more power than Rahm Emanuel and de Blasio when it comes to overseeing a budget. And none of that funding is allocated to Black and brown kids on prevention.
Thank you, Monica. I'd like everybody to give a hand to our panel and thank them for their contributions.